Welcome to the fourth session, which bears the title Constitutional Ratification and the Bill of Rights. Chronologically, we're talking about September the 17th, 1787, excuse me, all the way until the 13th state finally ratified during this period of time. And how did the issue of the Bill of Rights appear within this chronological context? So the chronology is what I've given you, and the context is ratifying. So to what extent did the Bill of Rights play a part in the ratification, and to what extent did the ratification play a part in the Bill of Rights? This is the first of three sessions this afternoon dealing with what we have called the politics of the Bill of Rights. Excuse me. And what you see on this screen is a chart, a state-by-state ratification table, in which I have put together what I think is the summary, excuse me, the summary chart table that captures the ratification struggle. And there are 6 stages. Stage 1 is called Now for the Bad News. And I hope that you can I hope you can read. Can you read it all from the back there? You can't read it. Is it possible to zoom in a bit, Lisa? Go up a little bit now. Is that better? Okay. All right. So, excuse me. The first column, you will see the order of the states in which they ratified the Constitution. The second column is, it so happens that the people who are named there also represented their state in Philadelphia during the Philadelphia Convention, which is known as the Constitutional Convention. And why is this important? Because when they went to Delaware, say those two, Bedford and Bassett, they came back from Philadelphia in a privileged position. They could say what transpired. What did the framers mean by this, this, and this? Because certain questions that came up during ratification were different than the questions that came up during the convention itself. The third column is other significant delegates that weren't in the Constitutional Convention of 1787 that summer, but were prominent folks in their own state ratifying conventions. The state ratifying convention, the dates, expected vote going in, expected vote, and final vote coming out, population ranking. So Delaware is the 13th out of 13th. It is the smallest state with 60,000 people. And this final column is known as significant outcomes. If I were to go to that state and wanted to do an in-depth study of that state, say with my students, what significant factors would I be looking at in order to that I should be emphasizing? Stage 1, now for the bad news. It's the point of departure is actually Article 7 of the actual Constitution. Article 7 of the Constitution. Article 1 is the legislative branch. Article 2 is the executive. Article 3 is the judiciary. Article 4 is what one state owes another state. Article 5 is how to amend the Constitution. Article 6 is the supremacy clause and who's boss in the system. And Article 7 is how this plan shall become the Constitution. And it says that it requires 9 out of 13 specially called state ratifying conventions to approve. And the approval of 9 will permit the Constitution, the plan to become the Constitution among the 9 who are ratifying. So that 4 could vote no, 9 could vote yes, but the 4 cannot hold up the 9 from moving forward. And that is good news, because under the Articles of Confederation, in order to make any changes, it had to have the unanimous adoption of all 13 state legislatures, which meant that Rhode Island would regularly vote no, and no changes were ever took place of any importance with the Articles of Confederation, which made it brittle. I mean, if you make it difficult to amend, you make it also easier to collapse because you're going to get an opposition amounting to it. So the 9 out of 13 is a way of capturing consent of the governed in a much better way, says Madison, than having 13 out of 13 state legislatures. So 4 states will be unable to hold things up. Notice also specially called state ratifying conventions, not the state legislatures, who are the ones who are going to lose under this new system, but rather specially called state ratifying conventions. And this is the first time, as my knowledge anyway, that you have this widespread set of elections taking place across the nation for one purpose. That is, shall I ratify or not ratify? I mean, that is the issue. There's no really anything else involved, although people are going there with another agenda in mind. That is postponing, attaching unfriendly requirements, various things of the politics. This is what we're looking at now, the politics. And you're seeing democratic politics in its early embryo stages at work here. And when you add up all the numbers, when you get to the bottom, you'll get to something the order of the final total vote is 1,270 delegates, something like that, yes, and 571 no. And the last one was like a 2-to-1 vote, and yet it was close. The reason why it's close is because each state is voting. It's like in the Electoral College. You can have the total popular vote, seems like 2-to-1 or whatever it is, and the person who wins the popular vote may not win the electoral vote, and vice versa. And why is that? It's nothing to do with anti-democracy. It has to do with the presence of the states. Once you admit the presence of the states, that each state is equal to another state, then you skew the popular vote in the direction of because your popular vote does not cross state lines. I think that's the key to it. You're electing a United States Constitution or a United States president, not an American Constitution or an American president. It's a United States, and that I think is extremely important to bear in mind. Well, the good news then was 9 out of 13 specially called state ratifying conventions. The bad news was that Madison wanted as close to unanimity as possible. You want to get off on the right foot, therefore you try to get everybody, or all the states, to be in agreement. Although it's not required, it would be prudent to achieve that. And then if we think about it, you've got some other bad news. And that is that 3 delegates to the Constitutional Convention did not sign. Elbridge Gerry, who signed the Declaration of Independence from Massachusetts, did not sign the Constitution. And that isn't good news because it means that he has a following now and could work with Sam Adams and maybe John Hancock in Massachusetts to cause consternation in Massachusetts. The other not so good news, or in fact bad news, is that New York had 3 delegates at the Constitutional Convention, John Lansing, Robert Yates, and they were there to outvote Alexander Hamilton. And Hamilton left early out of boredom, and then Yates and Lansing left, as they claim, out of protest, which shows you be careful when you leave the room because you've lost your influence when you've lost. But they're there waiting back in New York to cause some consternation. So those are 2 states. Rhode Island is probably not going to vote yes because it didn't even vote to go. So there's 3. You only need 1 more now and you're going to be really tricky. Well, how about Virginia? Virginia had, at the end, had 5 delegates. It originally had 7, and Wythe and McClurg left early. which left Madison on the one hand and with his buddy Blair, and George Mason on the other. By this time, they'd become unfriendly toward each other, particularly near the end there with the Bill of Rights, and Mason claiming, I want a Bill of Rights, and didn't get it. And Randolph claiming, I'm not going to go anymore with this, I want a second convention. So you've got two gone home, Blair and Madison voting yes, Mason and Randolph voting no. The only reason why Virginia could actually legitimately put its pen and say, we ratify, we sign the Constitution is that George Washington broke the tie. So there's something for you to take a look at, and what was George Washington's influence at the convention. There's one clear, because he had to break the tie between them. But you've got two delegates then who didn't sign. You've got Patrick Henry dying for a fight back home. Richard Henry Lee is ready for a fight. And so Virginia is in potential bad shape. So you've got New York, Virginia, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and as Massachusetts goes, so does New Hampshire. And, so you've got, that's the bad news. So the good news, 9 out of 13. Bad news, 9 out of 13. Stage 2 is the fall campaign off to a fast start. Just like in many, many presidential campaigns, if you're thinking about primaries. Are you telling me that what happens in one state has an impact on what happens in another state? Yes. That doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem democratic. How federal? Does it happen? Yes. Here. Is there one national primary? No. No, because it has an impact. Now, so where do you go first? Where you think you're going to win? Get a bandwagon effect rolling. Where do you not go? Where are you going to lose? So you postpone. What's the advantage of postponing? Well, you get several states behind you winning, and then you dare the others to say, well, we'll be different. We'll vote no. So there you go. The first 5, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, Connecticut. And you might ask the question, well, why is there such a difference in size? 38 people in New Jersey, 168 in Connecticut. Why this difference in size? Depends on each state. In New Jersey, there were 30 assembly districts in the district of in New Jersey state government. So they just use those districts for electing state delegates to go to the state ratifying convention. There were 168 in Connecticut. Connecticut liked the idea of small districts with a small number of people to be easily represented. So that these first 5 going in, coming out exactly the same. In other words, nobody changed their mind. And this is an interesting aspect of politics. That is, you don't compromise unless you need to. And what happened, the superior organization by the Federalist Party, the winning part, carried the day. They carried a slate of 30 people in the 30 districts. The Anti-Federalists didn't mount much of an opposition, and they didn't get anywhere. Well, stage 3, if we go down, is winter in New England. And you've got 2 states going on there, Massachusetts and New Hampshire. And what the Madison forces decided to do was to concentrate, as postpone New Hampshire until later, and then see if you could win in Massachusetts. Going in Massachusetts, you can see the vote, 177 yes, 178 no. So finally, the the opposition had made some inroads electorally. 350-something people, where are you going to put them? The answer is a church. That's the only place that could hold these people. Is that a large number of delegates in attendance? Yes. Could they hear each other? Sometimes not. But they debated, and there's a wonderful exchange that takes place between Madison and other people, with Madison being very, very concerned that if the Constitution does not pass in Massachusetts, it will have established a slippery slope that will be very difficult for the Constitution to manage to overcome. And so the politics was really quite furious. Something had to give. A compromise was needed. Somebody had to bend. How do you bend? When do you bend? On what principle do you bend? Do you bend on no principle? What do you do? And there's a low ground and there's a high ground explanations. And the low ground explanation went something like this. John Hancock was the leader of the convention, and a couple of the folks, Sam Adams, the rest of them, went up to him and said, John, we want you to make a deal. What's that? We want you to call in your political chips, the IOUs. Why? Well, we need to get this thing done, and the only person who can pull this off is you. Well, what do you want me to do? Well, I want you to do that. Why should I? Well, Washington's going to be president. They need to balance the ticket, Virginia, Massachusetts. How does Vice President Hancock sound? And the answer is, well, come on now. I mean, there's always John Adams. Out of sight, out of mind. He's in Europe. He's in Britain. So that's the low ground explanation. Hancock called in his chips, and the vote switched. The high ground is, John, we want you to do something for us. What is it? We want you to call in your chips. So what's high ground about this? That Massachusetts has been in the lead of this new set of republics since 1776. Are we going to be now the first state to say no? This is a question of leadership and honor. Massachusetts has been taking the lead on the Revolution. Virginia is taking the lead on the Constitution. We cannot permit this to take place. Call in your chits. So there's low ground, high ground, whatever ground there is. But that happens. And it's known as the Massachusetts Compromise. And this Massachusetts Compromise involves the following: ratify now, amend later. So that 10 people changed their mind and said, that will do for me. It wasn't conditional. They shook hands on it, so that in the first Congress, the idea was the representatives from Massachusetts would introduce amendment proposals to alter the Constitution in a direction more friendly to these delegates who were originally opposed. Now, if we take a look at these amendments, we will see that the Massachusetts amendments, amendment proposals, if we click on that, is that live? Yes, we'll have to go. We'll have to go all the way down to the end, I guess. Well, there are 9 proposals. There are 9 proposals which they come up with, but not one of them is a Bill of Rights. The amendment proposals, all 9 of them, are structural changes to the very government. Okay, there you go. All power or powers question, not delegated. That might be a Bill of Rights. I mean, that's a 10th Amendment issue as it comes up. Secondly, 1 representative for every 30,000. Third, Congress not exercise the powers vested in them by the 4th section. Fourthly, Congress not lay direct taxes, etc. No company. But there is no civil actions, right, in common law. All right, that's one. But the vast bulk of them are attempts to fiddle with the Constitution itself rather than add protections about what we would call a Bill of Rights. So these are known as amendments and not really Bill of Rights amendments. Are you with me on this? Okay. So great. Let's return then to our table of the various stages. So now that gets us over a hump. And then stage 4, if we keep going, right, do you have the table? Yeah, for stage 4 is where Maryland and South Carolina easily go. And then stage 5 is the long, hot summer. And going into, and nail biting time. Going in, you have, literally, New Hampshire is 57-47 going in. The Virginia is 87 going in. New York is is something like 27-43 going in. And for 2 weeks, the Constitution hung in the balance in these states. And what happened is that a fundamental distinction was made between going for a Bill of Rights and going for amendments to the Constitution. And this is absolutely critical for this first session this afternoon to make a distinction. All right. Massachusetts amendments, nothing much to do with a Bill of Rights. When it gets to Virginia and New York, then what you get is this distinction which is being made. So if we go back to the table, Lisa, and well, that one you can, yes, exactly. You go there, you can see, does this table end on this particular point here in Massachusetts? It does. All right. Why don't we go back to the mini, the mini monster, which we did right at the beginning of the session. Yes. If we could see there, if we over and about the 6th column, you'll see New York amendments proposals, New York Bill of Rights proposals, Virginia amendment proposals, Virginia Bill of Rights proposals. That distinction that there is critical because the Bill of Rights proposals, as you will notice, you can see what's included. The Virginia amendment proposals, you can see what is included. The Bill of Rights proposals is where Madison starts taking the lead. He starts taking the lead on behalf of these Bill of Rights proposals and divides the Anti-Federalists into 2. Those who are going to be in favor of amendments and those who are going to be in favor of Bill of Rights. Amendments means structure and power of the Constitution. That is, undo the work of what they did in Philadelphia. Unfriendly, fundamentally change it. Bill of Rights, Madison in charge, shepherding this through as additions, attachments, incorporations to the Constitution as we know it without fundamentally challenging its structure or power. That, I'm saying, is vital because if we now scroll down, you will see that down at the bottom, these are what I've done here is to show that Madison has 39 proposals that he's going to make into the first Congress. 39. And out of that, 26 become the Bill of Rights. Where did Madison get his 39 from? And the answer, if you notice here, 28, 29, 27 of them come from these, like the Virginia Ratifying Convention, the New York Ratifying Convention. That's where he gets them from. What does he not take up? The New York amendments, the Virginia amendments. So that's what I mean by splitting the opposition. Now you say, well, why are you doing all this detail? Because I have spent all this time, now it's your turn to suffer. But I'm trying to show you the politics of the Bill of Rights. There's nothing disgusting about this. This is democratic politics at work. You got 1,700 delegates involved, one way or the other, up and down these states. Pamphlet wars, newspapers are there, Votes are being taken. One state is influencing another state. Never done before, never before in the history of the world, and not a drop of blood was spilled. That's an incredible American story. Now, what does that have to do with the Bill of Rights? The answer is the Bill of Rights enters this remarkable American story. How does it enter? It enters because the opposition insists as a feature of letting things go through, of a willingness to compromise, as a willingness to be bipartisan, that a gentleman's agreement, not kicking the can down the road kind of compromise, but rather a compromise which says you'll do your best in the first Congress to try to bring about this change. Madison, adept as ever, statesmanlike as ever, understands what he has to do is to divide the opposition. And to make George Mason, who would at one time be very much in favor of a Bill of Rights, Virginia, very much in favor of a Bill of Rights, Constitutional Convention, now come out against the Bill of Rights and call Madison's proposals a tub to the whale, following Jonathan Smith, a mere sop to people that Madison can't even, that I can't even believe that Madison would dare to do such a thing. Of course he would dare to do such a thing. That's exactly what George Mason was willing to dare to do, 1776, 1787, and Madison outsmarted him. Founding fathers outsmarting another founding father? Yes. What's wrong with that? Well, we're supposed to be in ivory towers. Who said so? You're witnessing embryo form, democratic politics. I have no objection. I have no problem with this at all. All right. So that's an important part of the story in terms of the ratification of the Constitution. All right. The next feature that we want to take a look at in this story is to actually look at if you take a look at the Massachusetts, which we just did, if you take a look at New Hampshire has the same nine as Massachusetts, plus 3. And 10, 11, and 12. 10, no standing army, no laws touching religion, and to never disarm any citizen unless they have been in actual rebellion. So those are interesting additions that New Hampshire makes. So we have, in effect, I would argue, the outlines of the Bill of Rights now on the verge of the next stage. And the next stage meaning is what happens in the first Congress. Okay, and that we will take up in the next session, which was called the First Congress and the Bill of Rights. So what I want to do is open it up now for questions that you might have in terms of this particular phase. To repeat, this particular phase of our discussion is looking mainly at the indoors debate rather than the out-of-doors debate. Ratification out of doors is Federalist, anti-Federalist pamphlet war. We looked at that in the third session. The indoors debate is where actual politicians, somewhere in the order of 1,700 of them, in a population of 3 million, debated. They were elected officials, debated with each other, compromising when they had to, not compromising when they didn't have to, organizing themselves politically when they had to and not, and seeking some common ground with regard to gentlemen's agreements, etc., for the ratification of the Constitution. Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Virginia, Rhode and New York were absolutely critical. In each of those, some compromise was made, and some compromise was made either in the form of trying to amend the Constitution in a restraint states' rights direction, or making a distinction between unfriendly and friendly suggestions. But to repeat, there is no idea at this particular time that a Bill of Rights will be amendments. There is a distinction between amendments and a Bill of Rights. We shall see in the next session that the fact that the U.S. Bill of Rights turn out to be amendments to the Constitution is purely accidental and due to the politics of the First Congress. What we've been used to is a prefatory Bill of Rights or an inclusionary Bill of Rights. Amendments are considered to be alterations. A Bill of Rights are considered to be restraints on something that is already there rather than an alteration on something that is already there.
In the state ratification meetings, or
Yes.
whatever you want to call them, did the
Ratifying
issue
conventions, yes.
did this issue of slavery come up?
Yes. Yes, in fact, what we could do, Lisa, I think we have, do we have live Massachusetts, Virginia, and New York? Okay, well, what we can do is just, all right, if we go to Massachusetts, I'll give you a flavor and show you how slavery, where slavery would arise and how it might arise, okay? In Massachusetts, it's Eliot's Debates, Convention of Massachusetts, February the 6th, Volume 2. Is my summary alive? All right. Is there any way we can get the summary up? All right. Well, if you take Massachusetts, I have a day-by-day summary of what takes place. The way in which each of the conventions proceeded was that it would start at the preamble and work way through Article 1, Section 1, Article 1, Section 2, right? Article 1, Section 8, powers, 9, restraints, Article 2, the executive, Article 3, judiciary, etc. And they would work their way through. And if they're going to talk about, there you go. There you go, very good. So that we start off, agree to discuss each paragraph. So Article 1, Section 1, Article 1, Section 2. There they go, Article 1, Section 2 continued. Just keep scrolling, they're going through it. And et cetera, et cetera. And they spent a lot of time on Article 1, Section 2, which is the House of Representatives, and census. That's where they would stop and talk about the 3/5 clause. Okay? Then keep scrolling. And then we will get to Article 1, Section 8. Now, that's where the powers of Congress are located. Notice in the Massachusetts Convention, they spent a lot of time on the powers of Congress. They're deeply concerned. Therefore, they're going to talk a lot about states' rights to try to restrain those powers. Okay? So they keep going Article 1, Section 8. Then they're going to get, after Article 1, Section 8 comes Article 1, Section 9. And there we are. Article 1, Section 9 is the restraints on Congress. The first restraint is that Congress shall not get itself involved in the slave trade prior to 1808 in those states currently existing that think it's proper to admit. A discussion on Article 1, Section 9, the slave trade, takes place here. So now they continue. And they could do Article 2 and Article 3. Apparently, Massachusetts isn't too concerned about the presidency, Article 2. Article 3, well, because Hancock, I guess, I don't know. Article 3. Article 3 is the judiciary. They do spend a day on the judiciary, or part of a day. Article 4 doesn't raise a question at all, including privileges and immunities. Article 5 is Article, you're such a good-natured fellow. Article 5, Article 6, Article 7. And now the recorder says the conversation on the Constitution being ended, Mr. Carson moved that this convention do assent to and ratify the Constitution. Before the grand question being put, Mr. Heath says, well, excuse me, we have to make a deal here. And so they start talking about the deal. So the third place they could have talked about slavery was in Article 4, Section 2, which would be the Fugitive Slave Clause. That's not brought up. So that there are really three clauses on slavery. 3/5, slave trade, fugitive slave. The slave trade got quite a bit of attention in Massachusetts. And one would expect that. So now, they've gone through the Constitution. What do we do? And the answer is, we're going to make a deal of some kind. That becomes the Massachusetts Compromise. If we turn to, can we turn to Virginia? Day by day. They start. The problem with Virginia is that Patrick Henry is there. And he makes a nuisance of himself. Every single time they decide to start, he just bursts in. And he makes it total nuisance. The only place where where the delegates at any of these conventions talk about the preamble to the Constitution is here. Why? Patrick Henry says it shouldn't be we the people, it should be we the states. So Patrick Henry is willing to muddy the waters of a Bill of Rights with the states' rights. And he's willing to, not only willing, he is able to make a nuisance of himself. And he really ticks people off because they want it to be orderly. And he just says, screw it, I'm just doing whatever I want to do. I'm just going to make a nuisance. So that starts. And the preamble, on and on, etc. They go on. The preamble. Do they ever get done? There's a happy face. The preamble. There's another happy face. To be continued. Now, this is interesting because after doing, look, they're June the 9th, they haven't even cleared Article 1, Section 2 yet. But what is fascinating for those of you who want to study the judiciary, Virginia is the place to go to study the judiciary. You're not going to find a lot of conversation about slavery, but you will find a lot of conversation about the judiciary. There's a young delegate there by the name of John Marshall who talks about judicial review. And you should read it because this is 16 years before Marbury versus Madison apparently discovered judicial review. So you could read it. Anyway, so there's another example. So you would have to look at the way to answer your question is you look at each ratifying convention, and you look at as you go through, and you know that there are 3 spots that you can stop at. New York, they know by the time New York is done, New York is day by day, right? They go preamble, that's 1 day. Etc. Look, Hamilton defends the 3/5 clause as a necessary compromise. And the number of representatives is not all that bad. So, yes, New York talked about the 3/5 clause. And where would you talk about that? Article 1, Section 2. Yeah. All right. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Any other questions? If not, that brings us right about to where we want to be for wrapping up this session. So thanks again, and we'll be back in about 15 minutes. We're scheduled to start the next one at 2:15.
Thank you.